If it's Friday, President Biden hitting the trail in battleground Michigan and holding multiple calls with congressional allies as more Democrats call for him to step aside following a defiant and at times shaky press conference. Plus, former President Trump and Republicans revel in the Biden campaign's struggles as they prepare for the spotlight and the scrutiny of next week's Republican convention in Wisconsin. And one of Ukrainian President Zelenskyy's top advisors joins us in studio, fresh off a critical week of meetings right here in Washington that could pave the way for Ukraine to join the NATO alliance if it can defeat Russia. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker. Just moments ago, President Biden arrived in Michigan, where he will rally with supporters this evening as he kicks off a major week of campaigning. The president spent the first part of the day holding calls with groups of House Democrats, including the Hispanic Caucus and Asian Pacific American Caucus. It all comes following that high-stakes press conference yesterday that appears to have left Democrats in limbo, with a performance that was at times commanding and at times unsteady. The president defending his campaign, doubling down on his decision to stay in the race.
I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again. I'm not in this for my legacy. I'm in this to complete the job I started. I'm determined on running, but I think it's important that I allay fears by let them see me out there.
You earlier explained confidence in your vice president.
Yes.
If your team came back and showed you data that she would fare better against former President Donald Trump, would you reconsider your decision to stay in the race?
No, unless they came back and said, there's no way you can win. Me. No one's saying that.
Well, the president was clearly comfortable discussing foreign policy issues from Ukraine to China, but he did mix up Vice President Harris and former President Trump's names mere minutes into the event, just hours after mistakenly calling Ukrainian President Zelenskyy President Putin, something he caught.
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there. I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin. President Zelenskyy.
Now, despite those slip-ups, some of the president's Capitol Hill allies say last night's performance should end any conversations about him potentially withdrawing. Here's South Carolina Congressman and Biden campaign co-chair Jim Clyburn.
Should the conversation about the president getting out of this race, should that conversation continue?
No, it shouldn't. The conversation should focus on the record of this administration, on the alternative to his election, and let Joe Biden continue to make his own decisions about his future. He's earned that right, and I am going to give him that much respect. If he decides to change his mind later on, then we would respond to that.
So just leaving the door open a crack for President Biden to change his mind about his decision. Also, 5 more Democrats are now publicly calling for President Biden to step aside, bringing the total to 19. Here's Congressman Jim Himes, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, who broke with Biden mere minutes after the news conference ended.
The hard reality is, and I'm far from the only Democrat who believes this, that the numbers, the trajectory, what Americans feel in their bones right now suggest not only that Joe Biden would lose this race, but that he or we would lose the Senate and the House.
But the reality remains that the poll numbers are not as clear-cut as either the president's critics or supporters would like. 3 polls conducted after the debate, but before last night's news conference, show a close race nationally, which has not changed significantly from earlier in the year. But voter discontent with the president is palpable. He fares significantly worse than former President Trump on questions of fitness for office, with nearly 2/3 saying he doesn't have the mental fitness to serve as president, including 1/3 of Democrats and 2/3 of independents. Joining me now is NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez. He's on the ground with President Biden in Michigan, and NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles. We should note we are going to have new polling coming out on Sunday on Meet the Press. Gabe, let me start with you. Last night, President Biden was again defiant. What is the campaign? What are your sources telling you about how they are feeling today? Do they feel like they stopped the bleeding enough for him to continue and quiet those growing calls?
Well, Kristen, it's a bit of an ink block performance, isn't it? The supporters saw that performance and have a lot to point to. The detractors saw it. Certainly those misstatements that you just played, and they point to that as a reason for why President Biden should leave the race. But as for the Biden campaign, look, they say that a press conference like yesterday really didn't move the needle with voters out in America, out in these battleground states, and that is why they say President Biden is coming here to Michigan. He'll speak here in front of a crowd of supporters later on this evening inside this high school gymnasium. But look, they say that, the press conference yesterday, they didn't look at it as a singular event, but part of a larger series of events where they want to get him out there, make him more accessible, put him in unscripted environments, as you've been reporting on. Of course, there's the interview on Monday with Lester Holt. Then there's trips out west to conferences in Las Vegas, and he'll do that interview in Texas, where he's scheduled to speak at the LBJ Library. So quite a schedule over the next couple of days for the president to go out and about. But as for the campaign and last night, they do feel at least for now, that he did what he needed to do, and he put at least some of those doubters to rest, Kristen.
Gabe, while you've been speaking, we are watching live footage of President Biden, who's just touched down in Wayne County, Michigan, greeted there by dignitaries, including Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, who has warned that Michigan, as it always is, will be tough. Of course, President Biden won Michigan in 2020, part of his blue wall, Ryan, part of his blue wall that he will need to hold if he wants to hold on to the White House. And of course, concerns about states like Michigan are why you have a growing number of members of Congress, Ryan, saying that they are concerned about the president's viability. Ryan, we know that the president talked to some key caucus members on the Hill today. How was he received?
Well, it sounds like a mixed bag, Kristen, and it seems like in many respects that it was too little too late. I had a conversation just a few minutes ago with Jerry Connolly of Virginia. He's scheduled to be on one of these calls tomorrow with a group called the New Democrats. And what Connolly's expressed to me is that the White House should have been making these calls the day after the debate, not more than 2 weeks after the debate. And we do know our Capitol Hill team has confirmed that during this call with Hispanic members of Congress, that Mike Levin, who's one of the members of Congress that have called on the president to step down, forcefully confronted the president and said that he believes that he cannot win the election. And so that's an important flashpoint, because we know that there are members of Congress that are frustrated. But one of the things that they are frustrated about is that they don't feel that the message that they are sending to us, that they're sending through the media, that they're sending through statements and strongly worded statements, is not necessarily getting to the president himself, that perhaps it's getting to his aides and advisors, but somehow that message is being blocked or just not received by the president himself. So this was an opportunity for them to do that, but the president did forcefully push back. They released the transcript of his response in that meeting, and he is sticking to his guns that he is still the best candidate to win in November. I can tell you just from my own reporting in the last 12 to 13 hours, Kristen, that is not a widespread belief among House Democrats and Senate Democrats, for that matter. They are not that much relieved from what they saw last night. They are still very worried about the future of this campaign.
Gabe, let me go back to you, because ultimately the fate of members of Congress who Ryan's been talking to and the president rests with the voters. It's ultimately all about what the voters have to say. I know you've been out there talking to folks. What are they telling you, Gabe? Has this resonated with them?
Yeah, well, some of them are still processing this, but Kristen, you hit it. Michigan, of course, such a crucial battleground state, especially this time in the wake of the Israel-Hamas war, at least President Biden's handling of it. We've been hearing now for months that some of the voters here, especially Arab American voters, so concerned about how he's handling this. And so President Biden faces real troubles here in Michigan. But there was a poll that came out today, the NPR, PBS Marist poll, that really showed a tight race within the margin of error, not much movement at all after this debate. So the question is, did the debate, did it really move any of these undecided voters or even some Biden supporters who were pausing to stay home? We spoke with a few of those voters just over the past 24 hours or so. Take a listen to what they had to say.
I wish that Biden was 10 years younger, but he's not, and so we have to deal with the real. And the reality is he's 81 years old. I hope he doesn't take this personally, but I think it's time for him to step down.
I was a Biden supporter right up until the debate. Now I really would like to see an open convention. Problem is, he's not going to be able to win the election. So that's why I'd like to see someone else run.
So those were two Biden supporters that now say they would want to vote for somebody else. But we expect to hear, Kristen, from some Biden supporters that are sticking by him. They're streaming into this auditorium right now. They want to see what he has to say tonight. Kristen.
Gabe, fascinating conversations, tremendous reporting from both of you, Gabe and Ryan. Thank you for starting us off on this Friday. Joining me now is Illinois Democratic Congressman Brad Schneider. He is one of the House Democrats calling on President Biden to end his campaign. Congressman Schneider, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So walk me through your decision-making process. You actually called on President Biden to end his reelection bid yesterday before his press conference. How did you reach that conclusion? Why not give the president the benefit of the doubt? Listen to what he had to say last night.
Well, it wasn't about one press conference or a single debate or an election rally. It's really about what we've been seeing over the last several weeks, even last several months. And as I said in my statement yesterday, I love President Biden. I was the first of the Illinois delegation to endorse him 4 years ago. I did so because I knew he would be a great president. He has been a great president, a transformative president. But I'm looking also at the future and where we are. And between now and November 5th, we have to be doing everything we can to make sure we win in November. And what I tried to convey to the president, to the public, is we are at a watershed moment where President Biden can seal his places in history, put a capstone on an incredible career, secure his legacy by transferring the baton to the next generation. We've got a great bench. We've got a lot of people who are able and ready to lead. And if he does it in a way that unites the party, unites the nation, I think we can not just get to the finish line in November, but we can run through the tape and win with a big mandate.
Well, I want to drill down on you about what that process might look like from your perspective. But look, President Biden, pretty defiant last night. He said, look, if his team shows him evidence that he cannot win in November, then yes, he would consider dropping out of the race. He says he hasn't seen evidence that he can't win. Have you seen that in the polls? I mean, the reality is the head-to-head matchups have not moved that much, although clearly the crosstabs, if you dig into the details, in other words, it does tell a slightly more complicated story.
Yeah, I don't like relying on polls. I spent a lot of time in my district last week with the holiday. I had a chance to be all over my district. I walked in 8 parades, walked by at least 50,000 people. I had more people than I can count, hundreds, if not 1,000 people say, we love Joe Biden, but we need to find someone else to run this race. I didn't have anyone say it to me the other way. In our office, we get calls and letters and emails. We record all of those. It's running 30-1 that Joe Biden should pass the torch. Those are messages, and I talk to my colleagues. And as others have said, I'm not a lonely voice in this. This is not anything I take joy in. Joe Biden has been a great president, a great vice president, phenomenal senator. He has served his nation with dignity. And I think we are just at a point where he has a chance to do the last act, as George Washington did 240 years ago or less, but passing the baton and setting the country on a course to continue this experiment that we have celebrated for 248 years.
When I talk to the president's supporters, they say, look, passing the baton is more complicated than just passing the baton. You would likely have a big floor fight at the Democratic National Convention, even if the president were to endorse Vice President Kamala Harris, that you could be opening up the process to chaos, to murkiness. And they argue that that would be also handing Donald Trump a win. What do you say to that argument?
Well, the first thing I say is none of us can predict the future. I can't say with certainty that Joe Biden is not going to defeat Donald Trump in November. And if he is our candidate, I'm going to do everything I can, 100% and a little bit more, to get him across the finish line. I can't say for certain that someone else on the top of our ticket is going to do better, but I believe that if we unite the party, unite the country, we have a chance to do something great. And so we don't know what the future is. I don't know that there will or there won't be a contested convention. Mm-hmm. What I am hoping for and what I'm calling for is the party to come together, to unite in the convention, to get behind our candidate and recognize the threat we face with Donald Trump, a convicted felon, someone who wants to undermine our Constitution, overthrow our democracy, and put America's role in the world at risk, and in so doing, put America's and the world's security at risk at the same time.
Do you think that Vice President Harris is the strongest alternative to take on Donald Trump, or is there someone else who has caught your eye? Obviously, there are a lot of names that are being discussed. Governor Gavin Newsom, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Governor Josh Shapiro, I should say. There are a lot of different names that are being discussed as a potential nominee. Who do you have your eye on?
Absolutely. So you took my answer, because my answer is we've got a lot of people, right? And it's not for me to pick who it should be. What I will tell you, whoever it is, whether it's the vice president, who I think would be, as Joe Biden said yesterday, he would not have picked her to be vice president if she wasn't ready to step into that role. If it is one of these governors who have executive experience and a demonstrated record of accomplishment in their states, our bench is so deep and so wide that one of the key differences between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. Republican Party has become a party of a cult, but Democrats, we are a party not only of a big tent, but a tent with a lot of people who have done a lot of amazing things and who are committed to moving our country forward in an amazing way.
I'm curious, Congressman, since you called on the president to step down yesterday, have you urged other Democrats to speak up, to take your lead? And do you anticipate that the calls are going to grow based on your conversations with your colleagues?
And this is a matter of style. I've been talking to my colleagues last week during the holiday. I was making calls. I talked to them when we were in Washington this past week. And I said the same thing to everyone. You have to follow your heart. You have to do what your gut's telling you, what you believe is the best for the country. Since I made my position known yesterday afternoon, there have been others who have taken similar positions. I suspect there will likely be more. But at the end of the day, as Mr. Clyburn said earlier in this show, that it's ultimately the decision for the president. My hope is the president will follow the lead of George Washington, who set the standard by passing the baton to the next generation and setting the country on a course for success, that Joe Biden will live up to that example.
Congressman Schneider, very quickly before I let you go, what do you say to fellow Democrats who are concerned that your words, that the words of other Democrats who are calling on the president to drop out if he does stay in the race, will be used against him as we get closer to Election Day in Republican ads? Sure,
absolutely. And that's a fair concern. But here's the bottom line. What I'm saying is what I'm hearing from the people I represent. And they're all, almost all, overwhelmingly 30-1 are saying the same thing I'm saying. Fundamentally, we love Joe Biden. We think he's been a great president. And we think this is the moment to heroically pass the baton and move it to the next generation.
All right. Representative Brad Schneider, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's hear now from the Biden campaign. Joining me is Quentin Fulks, Principal Deputy Campaign Manager. Quentin, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Kristen.
So since last night's news conference, we have seen 5 House Democrats come out and say that the president should end his campaign. The goal, obviously, of that press conference was to stop the calls from growing. Did the press conference fail?
Look, the goal of the press conference was to talk to the American people about NATO and the stakes of foreign policy in America and President Biden's leadership in doing it. And I think that the president did that. In doing so, he also stood up for nearly an hour, a press conference, and answered some of the most difficult questions about some of the most complex issues facing our country. And he did so by answering a wide array of questions from reporters. Obviously, we know the subject matter of those questions, but I think that the president did exactly what he went out there to do last night, and that is to draw the stakes of this election about what his predecessor did, as he would say in an official speech, in his vision about what is going on in this country, about his command over the issues leading America, not just foreign, but also here domestically at home. And so that is what the president intended to do last night, and that's exactly what he did.
Quentin, you know, as you know, there has been a lot of discussion and intense focus on the language that he used last night. He said, look, if my team shows me that I can't win, then maybe I would consider getting out of the race. My question for you, is this a closed matter for him? Is there any way, and because there is conflicting data, as we laid out at the top, there's a lot of new data coming in. Has he completely shut the door on changing his mind, on passing the torch?
Yes. Yes. President Biden is the Democratic nominee. It has always been his decision to make. But even let's take a step back from that, Kristen. It's his decision to make because the voters made their decision. And of the 14 million votes cast in the Democratic process, Joe Biden won 87% of them. Of the delegates that were given out, Joe Biden has 3,900 of them. That is why Joe Biden has the decision to make, the power to make this decision, and that's exactly what he's doing. And I am a member of the president's team. And so when the president says to you that his team is not giving him that or not coming to him and saying, you can't win, it's because we are not. President Biden is in this race, and our campaign is going to continue to do what we have set out to do from the moment he announced re-election. We have built this campaign to be in a fight in a very close election, which we knew would be close before the debate, and that remains true now. And so we're going to continue to draw the contrast every single day of President Biden's agenda for America and that in Donald Trump and Project 2025.
What do you say to the argument, though, that there wasn't necessarily a competitive primary? Sure, you had one competitor, Dean Phillips, but this wasn't exactly the type of open primary that you are talking about with a robust number of candidates in some states. The rules were changed. I mean, what do you make of that argument?
I would say to that argument, and not to be defiant at all, but when we talk about rules, the rules have been the same for every single presidential election, and anyone could have challenged President Biden. Any Democrat could have stepped up to challenge President Biden. The ones who wanted to do that did so. And we are in this place where, again, as I reiterate, President Biden won 87% of 14 million votes, and our campaign steered him to that because we have been set out with a singular vision, which is, again, drawing the contrast and the stakes of this election and what Donald Trump wants to do by ripping away women's reproductive freedoms, by continuing to put a burden on the middle class while the wealthiest and big corporations get ahead, and continuing to incite violence and political extremism across this country. And so we have been prepared to do that since day one. We're prepared to continue to do it, and that is where our focus remains from now until November.
Quentin, let me show you some of what my NBC News colleagues are reporting and just get your reaction on the other side. This is from Biden campaign staffers this week. One person saying, quote, he needs to drop out. That's a Biden campaign official. Another saying he will never recover from this. No one involved in the effort thinks he has a path, said a second person working to elect him. Is there a thread of concern throughout the campaign, throughout campaign staffers who you were talking to?
Not that it's being voiced to me. And again, it's hard to address things like that because, again, it's hearsay. We don't see names on these statements. They're rumors and gossip mills. And all we can continue to do is do our job. But I am a member of the president's reelection campaign team, a leader on it. And I'm saying that I do think that he has a path. I know that he has a path. I've seen the numbers. And so, again, our campaign is focused. We're going to be honest and level with our staff. We are going to continue to do the work. This is a margin of error race. It has been since the outset of this. It's exactly where it is today. And we're focused on continuing to fundraise, continuing to build a campaign apparatus and infrastructure to draw the contrast between President Biden and Donald Trump.
Quentin, lay it out for me. What is the path? Because he was behind heading into the debate. He has slipped, albeit It is not a dramatic shift, but as you know, the numbers have gotten tougher for President Biden, including in some battleground states, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, now leaning Republican as opposed to being toss-up. What exactly does the path look like?
Well, first of all, in 2022, I was in Georgia, which is also a battleground state for us now. And people told me that the path was tough. I think people told Democrats across the country that the path was tough. In fact, some might have said there was no path. Yet here we are with the most successful midterm under President Biden's leadership than any since 1934. But the path, quite simply, look, we're not being Pollyannish about it. This is basic math. I mean, I could spit off the states to you. It's the blue wall, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, also the Sun Belt states, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina. We are very bullish. We believe that voters across this country understand what's at stake. They understand the danger that Donald Trump and Project 2025 that was written for him, they understand what it is. And so this is the contrast that we have to continue to draw by pointing out the work that the president has done and the danger that Donald Trump poses to this democracy and that he wakes up every single day thinking about.
Quentin, very quickly before I let you go, can you respond to, give us details about the reporting that the campaign has quietly run the numbers on Vice President Harris to see how she would do against former President Trump? What is the purpose of that? Is there a real consideration about passing the baton to her?
Well, there is no consideration about passing the baton to her because President Biden has made his decision. And at the end of the day, Vice President Harris is on the ticket. This is something that campaigns do. She is a member of this team. She is out all the time as one of our lead surrogates talking about the issues, women reproductive freedom. She is all across this country communicating with voters. And she's faced a barrage of attacks recently. And so this is standard run-of-the-mill, campaign things that happen behind the scenes with all of our principals, with surrogates, who are the best allies to get out talking about your points. And we know that just like every other campaign, and I think that a spotlight unfairly has been put on this because of the dynamics that have been taking place in the media over the past week. But that's all that is. But President Biden is the nominee, and we're going to continue to run this campaign as such.
Quentin Fulks, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for all of that information. And we will have our own poll coming out on Sunday, so make sure to tune in to Meet the Press for that. And make sure to tune in on Monday for Lester Holt's exclusive sit-down interview with President Joe Biden. Watch a preview on NBC Nightly News and then the full unedited interview in a primetime special at 9 p.m. Eastern on NBC and NBC News Now. And coming up just after the break, we're just 3 days away from the start of the Republican National Convention. We'll have the very latest on how the host city and how the presumptive nominee are preparing for the festivities. Do stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press Now on a very busy Friday. Welcome back. One group that's happy with how President Biden's news conference went last night, Republicans, especially those around former President Trump. Two sources telling NBC News that Trump world is feeling quite happy with the Biden presser, seeing it as not enough to push the president out and not enough to mitigate his electoral woes. Joining me now on set is my NBC News colleague, Garrett Hake, who has all of that reporting. Garrett, it is great to see you. Welcome back from leave. So break down what you're hearing from your sources. Trump has been in the background for once. We're not used to this. He's letting President Biden sort of enjoy all of these negative headlines.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of campaign 101, but not in line with how Donald Trump has mostly conducted himself in public. But when your opponent is struggling or making a mistake, you basically stay out of the way. That's what the Trump campaign has done. We've only seen him in public really twice since the debate. He's done a number of radio interviews, but he's basically taken a back seat. And what they want is basically what they saw last night, kind of a Goldilocks approach to Joe Biden. They want a weak Joe Biden as sort of the best possible opponent for them. Too strong, he's harder to beat. Too weak, potentially gets replaced. Their whole strategy goes out the window. They say they're prepared to run against anybody, but Joe Biden's the guy they've been running against for 2 years. That's what they want to continue to see.
That's what's so interesting. Let me just follow up with you on that last point, because I get the sense that there is some trepidation if he were to pass the baton. Sure, they have all of these attacks against the vice president. There's no surprise about that. And yet, they haven't really run the playbook on her in a real way. I mean, Are you getting that sense? What would it look like from their perspective if it went to Vice President Harris or someone else?
Well, I think the Trump campaign believes she's responsible for the Biden record as much as Joe Biden is. So on the issues, they could run against the same issue set. But instantly, Donald Trump once again becomes the old guy in the race.
That's right.
And he inherits all the problems that Joe Biden has about questions about whether he's fit enough, and the spotlight comes back on him in that way. So do they think Kamala Harris is particularly strong? No, but she's the less known commodity. And this version of the Trump campaign, as we've talked about many times, is a little bit more buttoned up. They want to have a plan. They want to stick to it. Joe Biden's the plan. The less disruption to that, the better from their perspective.
Let's talk about the other big soon-to-be headline that you and I are tracking. Who will Trump's VP pick be? Sometimes the helpful thing about covering Trump is that he confirms all of your reporting.
That's right.
He did that today. He put out his own short list, and he said he'll be announcing during the convention.
Yeah, he's made it clear for a long time this is the way he wants to do it. I mean, when you think about Donald Trump, the politician, sometimes he's sort of like stuck in a 1980s mindset. And if this were a 1984 convention, the idea, or a 1980 convention, the idea of I'm going to announce during the convention itself is right out of the playbook.
Yeah.
That's what he wants to do. He said again today he's going to do it. It's his call. He's driving the party bus right now. We're still looking at really, I think, mainly those three finalists, Marco Rubio, Doug Burgum of North Dakota, and J.D. Vance. That's the order I would probably put them in, from least likely to most likely. The vibes, and that's really all they are, seem to be Vance. But right now, I still believe no one knows the answer to this question except Donald Trump, and maybe not even him.
That's my suspicion as well. I think he's waiting to see, as he said, how this plays out on the Democratic side. Garrett Haake, thanks for your great reporting. Great to see you. And turning now to Milwaukee, where with less than 72 hours to go until the Republican National Convention, preparation is ramping up. The Milwaukee Police Department is expecting roughly 50,000 people at this event that could have major ripple effects for national politics and the Midwestern city's economy. Joining me now from Milwaukee is NBC's Shaq Brewster. So, Shaq, set the scene. You have been there. What's the mood like in the city? How are they preparing?
Well, I'm sure during this report you'll hear the preparations, but I'll show you some of the preparations, these last-minute preparations outside of the Pfizer Forum. You have the security barricades that we know will blanket the downtown area are still being built as we speak. As we know, Secret Service is responsible for security inside of the secure zone, but when you go beyond that, that's when it's the responsibility of the Milwaukee Police Department. And I talked to them several times. They say they are ready. They know that there's protests involved, but they feel confident about their ability to secure this convention.
Shaq, you always talk to the most fascinating people, and you met something of an odd couple, I think it's safe to say, of politicians that helped get this convention off the ground. Tell us about them.
Yeah, these are two who have been turning some heads here in Wisconsin, where the state has been in this open political warfare for well over a decade. I'm talking about Reince Preibus, the former head of the Republican Party, former President Trump's first chief of staff, and the mayor here, Cavalier Johnson, a Democrat who's strongly backing President Joe Biden. They've been working together to bring this convention, to recruit and donors for this convention and volunteers for it. And I sat down and talked to them about what their partnership has been able to accomplish. Listen here.
We both love politics, but we've come together, I think, for something great. And the mayor has been fabulous to work with from day one. And I've kind of joked that I've got to be careful with all these compliments because I'm going to ruin his political career. He's not going to be able to run for anything the way this is going.
Have you heard people say you're looking a little too close to the Republican Party here with this?
Look, you got a Democrat in a city that votes overwhelmingly for Democrats, voted overwhelmingly for President Joe Biden in 2020, will do so again in 2024.
Maybe not as much.
Well, I think we will. But yeah, I mean, there have been folks on my side of the aisle say, well, why are you hosting the RNC? And my thought again is those things that I said before. Like, I want to create a virtuous economic cycle in Milwaukee. I think the RNC helps us to be able to do that.
What was that first conversation like when you wanted to bring this to Milwaukee's being talked about? You guys were making the pitch. What was that first conversation like when you had to realize, okay, it's going to take partnership between a Democratic mayor and the Republican Party?
Well, I wasn't sure because I didn't really know the mayor. And we met at a restaurant with a group of members of the RNC. And I was sort of I mean, I wasn't surprised, but I think he's extremely talented, and I think he could be dangerous as a candidate, quite frankly, from a Republican standpoint. And he emphatically delivered, without hesitation, the commitment to bring a lot of money to the city, and he was always focused on that. And I saw that from day one.
How did this partnership start?
Well, first, I'll hold you to that, Reince.
You did.
In terms of being dangerous to Republicans in the future.
Oh, that. Okay. Well.
But I mean, to Reince's point, I mean, the relationship started. I think there was an appreciation on my part about what this could mean for Milwaukee. They know I'm a Democrat. They know what my values are. Like, I don't approve of the Republican platform, or certainly the nominee for the Republican Party. But I do support being in a position to be able to grow Milwaukee.
The partnership that people see helps people have the confidence that this convention will deliver. We're going to be, it's not just production inside the arena. It's construction. It's a $75 million security grant that we had to work together on in Washington, D.C. to make sure was delivered. That's $25 million more than has ever been granted to a host city.
You guys helped change legislation.
It was really hard. We were calling each other, like, hey, have you talked to Tammy Baldwin? Have you talked to your guys?
What's the takeaway from this?
Well, I mean, exactly what Reince just said, right? There are so many things, especially today, that are divisive in politics, but there are a certain number of things, many things, I think, where you can find some common ground, where you can work to advance those common causes.
Now, I did also have to ask Reince about that RNC platform that we saw released earlier this week. He admitted that he was surprised by that abortion language that was toned down a little bit, no call for a national abortion ban, but he said he liked and appreciated the 14th Amendment language that it ultimately landed on, Kristen.
All right, Shaq Brewster, love the bipartisan conversation. Appreciate your reporting. I will see you in Milwaukee in a couple of days. I will be anchoring Meet the Press Now live from inside the convention hall every day of the Republican National Convention, and we'll have special nighttime NBC News coverage throughout the events next week, right here on NBC News Now. You do not want to miss it. Coming up next, left in limbo. Where do Democrats go from here? The panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Even as President Biden is insisting he's the Democrat best equipped to defeat Donald Trump, he's also touted the qualifications of his vice president. As the Biden campaign just confirmed, Quentin Fulks, to us here on this show, the campaign is assessing her potential viability at the top of the ticket.
This was a hell of a prosecutor. She was a first-rate person, and in the Senate, she was really good. I wouldn't have picked her unless I thought she was qualified to be president. From the very beginning, I made no bones about that. She is qualified to be president. That's why I picked her.
Now, some recent polling has the vice president narrowly ahead of Donald Trump in a hypothetical matchup, but her lead is within the margin of error. And again, we'll be releasing our own poll on Sunday on Meet the Press. I'm joined now by my panel, Chris Cillizza, founder of the So What newsletter and senior advisor at Denton's Global Advisors, Simone Sanders-Townsend, former chief spokesperson for Vice President Harris, and now a co-host on MSNBC's The Weekend, and Lance Trover, Republican strategist and former spokesperson for Doug Burgum's presidential campaign. Thanks to all of you for being here. A lot to chew on today. Chris, let me start with you.
Sure.
Where are we today after this press conference?
Where are we now?
Where are we now after this press conference?
Look, I don't think it takes a huge political mind to think that if the president's campaign is polling the viability of the vice president at the top of the ticket, that's not necessarily where you want to be a month before the Democratic convention. Yeah. I think Joe Biden has moved from the Lord Almighty, his words, was the only person to get him who could get him out of the race, to yesterday, I would need to see polling that would show I can't win and Kamala Harris can win. I would suggest there's data out there in swing states, in particular.
You have to dig for it. It's not the top line.
It's not the national polling, which isn't great for him, but not that bad. But I would suggest in swing states there is that data out there. I just think if this race is a referendum on Joe Biden, which means a referendum on age, he probably loses. If this race is a referendum on Donald Trump, Donald Trump loses. It's just, I hate to oversimplify, but if you take that off the table, I'm not saying Kamala Harris wins 60-40.
Yeah.
I just think it's such a big issue, and I don't know how he solves that problem, that I think in my opinion, if Democrats want to win, that's the move they should make.
Simone, pick up on that point, because I have spoken to a number of Democrats who have privately said, and of course a growing number of them now publicly have said exactly the point that Chris is making, that it's not a matter of it's a tough road. It's a matter of they think he can't win. And the revelation that, yes, they are polling Vice President Harris. Now, Quentin Fulks, to be fair, said this happens in campaigns. But what do you make of all this?
So I think on the polling front, what I made when I first saw the polling, and I think I tweeted this, I said it could be in good faith, right? It could just be that they are looking because Donald Trump has stepped up his attacks on her. So they want to know what is landing, what is resonating with their voters and swing voters, so they know how to counter that. Like, what ads do they need to put out? What do they need to tweak the messaging? When I saw it, I also thought it could mean that, they're looking to find some polls that say, look, she doesn't do really well, to show people to potentially drag congressional support back to the president. That would be the cutthroat political option. I would hope that is
you
not
always got to look for that one.
Okay, I hope it is the the former, not the latter. And it sounds like from Quentin Fulks that it is the former. So, okay, I believe Quentin Fulks. Okay, he's a trustworthy individual. I think when it comes to this conversation about the vice president at the top of the ticket and what members are saying, my gut, Kristen, was just telling me to call up some DNC members, because of the DNC members also saying this. At one point I was like, am I crazy? And when I spoke to the DNC members, pledged delegates, people who run caucuses of the DNC, they said that their membership is with the president. And so you have this split screen of members of Congress who frankly do not get a vote on the first ballot, thanks to my former boss Bernie Sanders. Made sure superdelegates didn't have that option, thanks to 2016, thanks to the Unity Commission. I was a member, okay?
We're getting a history lesson.
Look at that now. Now all of these elected officials coming out saying, oh, I want the president to step down. They don't even have a vote on the first ballot. So it is not them that will make this decision. It's the pledged delegates. So I think we need to continue to keep our ear to the streets on this one.
That's a really critical point. Lance, pick up here, because the person who has been noticeably out of the spotlight is Donald Trump. And I can't remember the last news cycle where Donald Trump was out of the spotlight, clearly allowing Biden to kind of have all of these headlines. But is there some concern within the Republican Party if someone else were to be the standard bearer?
Well, right now it's the best of both worlds for Donald Trump, right? I mean, if you look at what happened last night, he did just good enough to kind of put people at bay, but then he was still messing up names and the like. And so, look, I think the Trump campaign absolutely takes Joe Biden seriously, unlike the folks on Capitol Hill. The Democrats on Capitol Hill are clearly not taking him seriously right now. I do think they take Joe Biden seriously, and that's why you're seeing them still go after him out there. When it comes to the vice president, as Garrett was talking about earlier, really the issues are going to be the same, because at the end of the day, the fundamental core issues that voters want to hear about, the border, the cost of living, those are still the same, and she has been his number two, and that's what will be litigated out there.
What about the fact that Trump, Chris, hasn't risen that much since the debate? I mean, should Republicans be looking at that number saying, well, maybe he's not as strong as
I got up this morning and I saw a poll, because someone who doesn't like me sent it to me and said, see, you're wrong. That had it Biden 50, Trump 48 nationally. Now, the people that I talk to say, yes, part of that is we're so polarized that, if we ran this phone against this coffee cup and one was Republican and one was a Democrat, it'd be 50-48 one way or the other. It just, it's totally irrelevant of any external circumstances. What I would say is what I said before, though. Look at swing states. Look at House districts. Simone's exactly right about delegates. It's such a good point. The one I would point to is, I would argue in this, not all members of Congress are created equally. If you're from some rando district that's not competitive, whatever. What I pay attention to is the people who are in swing districts, right, who are going to be targeted, whether Joe Biden is on the ticket or not. What are they saying? Because let me just unveil a dirty little secret of politics. They're doing polling to see what their situation is. So I just think, I always pay attention to those frontline members, people who are in districts where we know Republicans are going to target. What are they saying? But Simone's right. They still don't get it. They don't get a vote on the first ballot, but I think it's an indicator.
This is a good point, though, but I think about the fact that you've got Mark Levin that just in California. He is in a swing district who came out. Angie Craig, swing district in Minnesota. I mean, and she is fighting for her political life, honey. The Republicans in Minnesota, that is a purple district. And I think she made a calculation. But then I also also think about the head of the Congressional Black Caucus, Stephen Horsford, who is a frontline member in Nevada. And so if Stephen Horsford really thought that his district was in trouble, I doubt that he would be putting his name on a statement. So I think that it is kind of a every man for him or herself situation when it comes to Congress. But I just wonder, like, I want the Democrats, what is the strategy? If Joe Biden is saying he's not getting off the ticket, how does it benefit them for another week to have this very public, embarrassing conversation that has to have a drag on voters?
Why don't they just call him to resign? I mean, if they're saying he can't run and win an election, like, if that's the concern,
that's in 4 months, by the way, Lance.
That's in 4 months. What is he doing being the commander-in-chief?
Well, I saw him last night, honey, and
but I'm saying that's the question that is going to come next for these frontline members. Well, if you think he can't run,
what about that?
Well,
I just think, first of all, I think I personally believe what the members of Congress are doing is just so unstrategic. I can't even. I think that they are in a bubble and they need to get out of their bubble. And I'm shocked because former Speaker Nancy Pelosi is someone who is extremely strategic, and it is just it's like they're going to Vegas with their rent money.
To that point, I mean, she came
they
out.
Don't know next time they're getting paid.
She came out, and to some extent, Congressman Clyburn did, and just gave a little bit of wiggle room, left the door open just a little bit to say Joe Biden can still make up his mind, even though he says he's made up his mind.
Yeah, I know. Well, that thing on Morning Joe was totally fascinating because it was like, I mean, we'll just see. I think the president needs room to make up his mind. Like 24 hours before, Joe Biden was like, I'm running. I've made my mind up. It's like, Nancy, and I think Simone's exactly right. Like, Nancy Pelosi didn't get to where she is because she's dumb. Yeah. She's really smart and really strategic, and I would argue the most effective politician of either party in the House or Senate in decades. Yeah. Pay attention to her. She's basically saying, what she was saying to Biden there is, maybe you should re-examine that decision. Now, he doesn't have to, but I do think that to me was the sign of like, okay, well, maybe this book isn't totally closed.
Speaks to the fact that she's feeling the heat. Lance, very quickly, what are you going to be watching for? Who's going to be the next VP nominee?
Oh, my goodness. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If I knew this answer, I'd be all on red in Vegas, be on an island somewhere, cash in.
You think Doug Burgum gets it?
I'm obviously a tad biased. I think he would make an excellent vice president, but I think Trump's looking pretty strong right now. I'm not sure it really matters.
No tea leaves? You don't got nothing?
No tea leaves?
By the way, I actually think, not to be a Burgum promoter, but I do think if you're Donald Trump and you think you're winning, Burgum is the safest pick.
Yeah, great point. All right, well, unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Phenomenal panel. Thank you so much, Chris, Simone, and Lance. Really appreciate the great conversation. Coming up, a top advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy joins me next after this week's crucial NATO conference. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. After meetings with President Biden, NATO allies, and leaders on Capitol Hill, Ukraine's President Zelenskyy is ramping up his diplomatic blitz today. Speaking at the National Governors Association summer meeting, Zelenskyy once again laid out the stakes in the war against Russian aggression, saying he is in a fight against evil. He also thanked the bipartisan gathering for their continued support for Ukraine's war effort. Joining me now is Igor Zhovka, a top advisor to President Zelenskyy and deputy head of the Office of the President of Ukraine. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to talk to you about the NATO summit, which was held here in Washington. What was your top takeaway? What was Ukraine's top takeaway from the summit? Was it successful?
Yes, it was successful, and apart from the very good formulas which were in the final declaration on Ukraine's irreversibility to membership to NATO, that was very important to be fixed in both the final declaration and NATO-Ukraine Council meeting. The practical results which were awaited for, they are more than good. I mean, what I would take as the most important outcome is this statement on the air defense. I mean, look, we badly need this air defense now in Ukraine. You saw what was happening on Monday in Kyiv and in other cities when they bombarded the biggest children's hospital in Kyiv, killing children, etc. So that's the awful, and that's why we need more and more air defense. It's very good that in this statement, 5 air defense systems are fixed, and we're hoping that in a very soon manner they will come to Ukraine, and some more to come by the end of the year.
Did you get assurances that that will happen?
Yes, my president talked to each and every leader of the country who is delivering this, to President of Romania, to Prime Minister of the Netherlands, certainly to US President Biden. We're thanking each and every for making these decisions. It's very important for them to be implemented very soon.
President Zelenskyy said in order for Ukraine to win the war, the U.S. has to lift its limits on striking targets inside Russia. Did he discuss that with President Biden? Obviously, the president addressed that at his news conference yesterday, but do you anticipate that that is something that will happen? Did he get any assurances about that?
Look, the process has started already, you know, about the U.S. decision, recent decision to lift the bans on the near abroad. We need this because, I mean, Russia is hitting all of our cities, but especially the cities in eastern Ukraine. I mean, look, I mean, what was happening around Kharkiv only 2 months ago. This recent decision of U.S. president helped us to stop this counteroffensive. Now we need to finally, you know, get them without their capacities to ruin Ukrainian cities. So we are working with the U.S. administration, our Ministry of Defense, are working with DOD. My president, certainly he raised this issue with President Biden, and certainly he will be raising it in further conversations. And I'm absolutely sure we're going to get it sooner or later.
Do you have any sense of a timeline when that might happen?
Well, let's not talk here about timelines. These decisions, they need, you know, quietness in this regard. As soon as we have it, everyone will see it.
What do you want Americans to know about the war in Ukraine that they may not understand?
They may not understand that the war is still going on in that severe manner as Russia did in the first days of open aggression. I mean, that was happening on Monday in Kyiv, resembled all of us, these awful first days. I mean, they're hitting deliberately the civilian targets, the children's hospital. That's the brutality, the cruelty, which the world had never seen before. So I want the Americans to remember this is the war in the center of Europe. In the 21st century, they are killing children and civilians in the center of Europe. We need America to support us. We need America to win.
As you know, there is an election underway in this country. Former President Trump has said he could end the war in 24 hours. There are concerns that that would require giving up some Ukrainian territory. Do you have a reaction to that notion that this war could be ended in 24 hours?
Look, I mean, my president already responded to this. I mean, he told that he would have desired to see this plan, if this plan exists. And let's look at it and let's sit and discuss, because nothing should be done under Ukrainian expenses. Certainly, we will never trade any inch of Ukrainian territory. Certainly, any peace would be achieved by sacrificing the parts of Ukrainian territory or the sacrifice of live Ukrainian people. So we will continue to fight, and we need to win. And the victory for us is bringing back all Ukrainian territories.
And as you know, there are also questions swirling in the wake of this debate between President Biden and former President Trump about President Biden's capacity to serve another 4 years to defeat Donald Trump. There was this moment where he temporarily mistook President Zelenskyy for President Putin. He then corrected himself. Did you come away from this summit with the sense or any concerns about President Biden's capacity to serve?
Look, no, we had a very good and productive bilateral meeting between my president and President Biden. It lasted almost 1 hour. And many important things, including those things which you're asking about, and other things were discussed for about an hour. Then immediately it was followed by the NATO-Ukraine Council. Again, a unique format where Ukraine was in the center. And then after that, there was Ukrainian Compact event. So we had President Biden talking the whole day about Ukraine. We're absolutely satisfied.
All right. Thank you so much for being here in person. We wish you safe travels home, Igor Zhovka. Really appreciate it. And thank you for being with us this hour. I'll be back Monday with more Meet the Press Now, live from the Republican National Convention as we kick off a week of live coverage from Milwaukee. And if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press. I'll have exclusive interviews with Senators Chris Coons and Bernie Sanders, plus Senator Lindsey Graham. Do not miss it. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or follow us on social media.